A man abandons his wife and invites her to his wedding with a younger woman, but he was left speechless by what happened. Before listening to this incredible story, click subscribe to see more exciting stories like this and avoid 10 years of bad luck in love. Sarah Johnson stared nostalgically at the family photos adorning the mantelpiece. Her gaze lingered on one image in particular, herself, her husband Michael, and their young daughter Emily, smiling on the beach during their last vacation together. It seemed like an eternity had passed since then, although in reality only 2 years had gone by. The sound of the front door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Emily, now 10 years old, came running into the living room. "Mom, has Dad arrived? Can we start the party now?" the girl asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Sarah felt a pang in her heart. "Not yet, sweetie. But don't worry, I'm sure he'll be here soon." As Emily went upstairs to finish getting ready, Sarah checked her phone for the umpteenth time. No messages, no calls from Michael. She sighed deeply, remembering how everything had changed since her husband received that promotion at Galaxy Corporation. At first, the news had filled them with joy. Michael's new position as Director of Special Projects meant a significant pay raise and new opportunities they had celebrated with champagne. Imagining a bright future, Sarah had even started dreaming about leaving her job as a teacher to pursue writing, her secret passion. However, reality turned out to be very different from their dreams. Michael's long workdays turned into entire nights at the office, family dinners became increasingly rare, and weekends together practically disappeared. Sarah tried to stay positive, telling herself it was just a phase, that things would soon return to normal. The doorbell rang, startling her. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be Michael, but when she opened the door, she found her parents' smiling faces instead. "Happy birthday to the most beautiful granddaughter in the world," her mother exclaimed, laden with gifts. Sarah forced a smile. Come in. Emily will be delighted to see you." As her parents settled in the living room, Sarah couldn't help but notice the worried look they exchanged when they saw that Michael wasn't present. Guests started to arrive. Emily's classmates, some neighbors, family friends. The house filled with laughter and lively conversations. But Sarah felt an emptiness inside that grew with each passing minute. Finally, when the cake was already on the table and everyone was waiting to sing "Happy Birthday," the front door opened. Michael rushed in, his suit wrinkled and a guilty expression on his face. I'm so sorry," he mumbled as he approached Emily to give her a hug. "Happy birthday, Princess Emily." Happy to see her father, didn't notice the tension in the air, but Sarah did. And as she watched her husband interact awkwardly with the guests, apologizing for his tardiness with excuses about an important meeting, something inside her broke that night. After everyone had left and Emily was asleep, Sarah confronted Michael in the kitchen. "Do you realize what's happening, Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're missing out on your daughter's life." "Our life." Michael, exhausted, ran a hand over his face. "Sarah, please, you know how important this project is for my career. I just need a little more time to establish myself in the position, and then things will calm down." "A little more time?" Sarah felt anger growing inside her. "You've been saying that for months. When will it be enough? When Emily graduates from college?" "You're exaggerating," Michael replied, irritated. "I'm doing all this for you, for our future." "No, Michael, you're doing it for yourself, for your ambition." Sarah looked him straight in the eyes. "And while you're chasing your dreams, you're destroying ours." With those words, Sarah left the kitchen, leaving Michael alone with his thoughts. As she prepared to sleep in the guest room, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in their marriage. What she didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a series of events that would transform her life forever. The months following Emily's birthday were an emotional roller coaster for Sarah. Each day, the distance between her and Michael seemed to grow a little more. Promises of change vanished as quickly as they were made, and arguments became more frequent and bitter. One Sunday afternoon, as Sarah was grading exams at the dining room table, She heard the front door open. Michael entered, his face tense and eyes tired. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, sitting across from her. She looked up from her papers, a feeling of dread settling in her stomach. "What's wrong?" Michael took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been offered to lead a new project at the company. It's an incredible opportunity, but I'll have to travel a lot. I'll be gone for weeks, sometimes months." Sarah felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. What about Emily? What about us?" "It's only temporary," Michael insisted. "A year, maybe 2. After that, I'll be able to choose any position I want in the company." "Think about the future. We could have—" "Future?" Sarah couldn't contain a bitter laugh. "Michael, you're barely present now. How do you think it will be if you accept this?" The argument that followed was long and painful. Michael accused Sarah of not supporting his ambitions, while she reproached him for forgetting what really mattered in life. When Emily came downstairs, attracted by the shouting, they both fell silent abruptly, but the damage was already done. In the days that followed, the tension in the house was palpable. Michael spent even more time at the office, avoiding confrontations, while Sarah immersed herself in her work and caring for Emily. One night, as Sarah was helping Emily with her math homework, the girl asked a question that broke her heart. "Mum, are you and Dad going to get divorced like Lucy's parents?" Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, fighting back tears. "No, sweetie, Dad and I are just going through a difficult time. Everything will be okay." But even as she spoke those words, Sarah wasn't sure she believed them. Weeks turned into months, and the situation didn't improve. Michael accepted the new project, and his trips became increasingly frequent and long. Sarah found herself practically raising Emily alone, balancing her work as a teacher with household responsibilities. It was during one of these periods of Michael's absence that Sarah received an unexpected call. It was David Thompson, Michael's boss at Galaxy Corporation. "Sarah, I hope I'm not bothering you," David said in a kind voice. "I wanted to talk to you about Michael. We've noticed he's been distracted lately. Is everything okay at home?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before responding. "To be honest, David, things have been difficult. Michael barely spends time at home, and when he does, it seems like his mind is elsewhere." There was silence on the other end of the line before David spoke again. "I understand. Look, I don't usually do this, but I care about my employees and their families. Would you like to have coffee sometime? Maybe I could give you a different perspective on the situation." Sarah surprised herself by accepting the invitation. A few days later, she found herself sitting across from David in a coffee shop near her school. To her surprise, the conversation flowed easily. David was a good listener and seemed genuinely interested in helping. "Michael is brilliant at his job," David said, "but sometimes men like him need someone to remind them of what really matters in life." As they talked, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different David was from Michael. Where her husband was intense and obsessive about work, David seemed to have a more balanced approach to life. He spoke passionately about his work, but also about his family and hobbies. By the end of the afternoon, Sarah was surprised to realize she had spent hours talking with David. They said goodbye with the promise to stay in touch, and Sarah returned home feeling lighter than she had in months. However, that feeling of relief was short-lived. That same night, Michael returned from his business trip with news that would shake the foundations of their marriage. "Sarah, we need to talk," said Michael, his voice unusually serious. "I've been thinking a lot during this trip, and I think we need time apart." Sarah felt as if the ground was opening up beneath her feet. "What are you saying, Michael?" "I'm saying I want a divorce," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "I've met someone else, someone who understands my ambition, who supports me in my goals." Sarah's world crumbled in that instant. All the hope she had harbored of saving their marriage vanished. Through tears and choked cries, Sarah listened as Michael explained that he would move out, that they would arrange Emily's custody, that it was best for everyone that night, as Emily slept unaware that her life was about to change forever. Sarah cried until she had no tears left. She felt betrayed, abandoned, lost. But in the midst of her pain, a small voice inside whispered that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something new. What Sarah didn't know was that this painful ending was just the prelude to a new and surprising stage in her life, one that would lead her down paths she never could have imagined. The months following Michael's announcement were a whirlwind of emotions for Sarah. The divorce process turned out to be as painful and complicated as she had feared. Long meetings with lawyers, endless discussions about Emily's custody, and division of assets left her physically and emotionally exhausted. Emily, for her part, struggled to understand why her father no longer lived with. Them nights were filled with silent tears and questions that Sarah didn't always know how to answer. "Why doesn't Dad love us anymore?" Emily asked one night, clinging to her favorite teddy bear. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, feeling her heart break a little more. "Dad loves us, sweetie. It's just that sometimes adults make difficult decisions that we don't always understand." While dealing with the emotional chaos at home, Sarah immersed herself in her work as a teacher, finding comfort in the routine and affection of her students. It was during this period that she began to receive occasional messages from David Thompson, Michael's boss. At first, they were simple questions about how she was handling the situation and offers of help if she needed it, but over time, the conversations became more personal. David shared anecdotes about his own divorce years ago and how he had managed to rebuild his life one afternoon as Sarah was grading exams in the teacher's lounge. She received a message from David that took her by surprise. "Sarah, I know you're going through a difficult time, but I was wondering if you'd like to have coffee with me this weekend, just to chat and distract yourself a bit." Sarah stared at her phone screen, indecisive. On one hand, the idea of going out and talking to an adult about something other than divorce or school problems sounded tempting. On the other, she couldn't help feeling a pang of guilt at the idea of meeting her ex-husband's boss. After several minutes of internal debate, Sarah replied, "Thank you, David. I could use a little distraction Saturday afternoon." Saturday arrived faster than Sarah expected. After leaving Emily with her grandparents, she headed to the small cafe where she had agreed to meet David. As she entered, she saw him sitting at a table by the window, absently flipping through a magazine. David looked up and smiled when he saw her, standing to greet her. "Sarah, I'm glad you came," he said, giving her a gentle hug that took her by surprise. They sat down and ordered their drinks. At first, the conversation was a bit awkward, with prolonged silences and nervous glances. But gradually, the tension dissipated and they began to talk more freely. David told her about his passion for photography, a hobby he had taken up again after his divorce. Sarah, in turn, surprised herself by talking about her dream of writing, something she hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. "You should try it," David encouraged her. "Sometimes, writing can be a wonderful way to process our emotions." As they talked, Sarah couldn't help but notice how different David was from Michael. Where her ex-husband had always been intense and ambitious, David seemed more relaxed, more in tune with the simple things in life. The hours flew by and, before they knew it, the sun was starting to set. David insisted on walking Sarah home. "Thank you for this afternoon," Sarah said when they reached her door. "I really needed it." David smiled. "The pleasure was mine. I hope we can do it again soon." As she watched David walk away, Sarah felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. For the first time in months, she felt hopeful. The following days brought new challenges. Michael, who had been relatively absent since the divorce announcement, suddenly wanted to spend more time with Emily. Sarah suspected his new girlfriend had something to do with this sudden paternal interest one afternoon. While waiting for Michael to bring Emily back from a day at the park, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was Karen, David's secretary. "Sarah, I'm sorry to bother you," Karen said, her voice tense. "But something has happened at the office and I thought you should know." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What happened? Is everything okay?" Karen hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It's about Michael. There was an important meeting today, and let's say he wasn't up to par. David is furious." Sarah listened carefully as Karen explained how Michael had arrived late to the meeting, poorly prepared, and to make matters worse, smelling slightly of alcohol. The important client they were meeting with had left visibly upset. David is considering firing him, Karen concluded. I thought you should be prepared for Emily's sake. Sarah thanked her for the information and hung up, feeling stunned. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction at Michael's problems, but another part, the part that still remembered the man she had fallen in love with, worried about him. When Michael arrived with Emily a few hours later, Sarah immediately noticed that something was wrong. Her ex-husband looked haggard, with pronounced dark circles under his eyes and a defeated expression on his face. "Can we talk for a moment?" Michael asked, after Emily went up to her room. Sarah nodded, leading him to the kitchen. "What's going on, Michael?" Michael slumped into a chair, running a hand through his hair. "I've ruined everything, Sarah. The job, our family, everything." Sarah observed him in silence, waiting for him to continue. "Jessica left me," he finally said, referring to the woman he had, left Sarah for, she said, I wasn't the man she thought I was, and now I'll probably lose my job too. Sarah felt a mix of emotions, compassion, anger, a tinge of vengeful satisfaction that immediately made her feel guilty. But above all, she felt relief. Relief that it was no longer her responsibility to fix Michael's problems. "I'm sorry, Michael," she finally said, "but you have to understand that I can't be your emotional support anymore. For Emily's sake, I hope you can get your life in order." Michael nodded slowly, the reality of his situation finally hitting him with full force. He got up to leave, but before going out, he turned to Sarah. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. I'm sorry I didn't value it when I had it." As she watched Michael walk away, Sarah felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. For the first time since her marriage began to crumble, she felt that she could really move forward. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah took out her old laptop. She opened a blank document and, for the first time in years, began to write. Words flowed from her fingers, releasing emotions she had kept bottled up for too long. As she wrote, her phone vibrated with a message. It was from David. "Hope you had a good day. Would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" Sarah looked at the message, a smile forming on her lips. Maybe, just maybe, life was giving her a second chance in more ways than one. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. Sarah surprised herself by finding a new routine, one that no longer revolved around Michael's absences or crises in their marriage. Her relationship with David continued to develop slowly but steadily. They began to see each other more frequently, first under the pretext of discussing Michael's situation at the company, then simply for the pleasure of each other's company. One Saturday afternoon, as they were walking in the park after lunch together, David gently took Sarah's hand. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, a mix of excitement and fear at the prospect of opening her heart again. "Sarah," said David, stopping and looking into her eyes, "I know you've been through a lot, and the last thing I want to do is pressure you, but I want you to know that I care about you a lot." Sarah felt her heart racing. "David, I care about you too, but I'm scared for Emily, for my job, for everything." David nodded. "Understandingly, I get it, and I respect that we can go as slow as you need. I just want to be there for you, in whatever capacity you'll allow me." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she couldn't help but think about how her life had changed in recent months. Emily seemed happier and more adjusted to their new reality. Her writing, which had begun as a form of therapy, had become a renewed passion, and now there was the possibility of a new love in her life. However, life had other plans to test the budding relationship between Sarah and David. One morning, as Sarah was preparing breakfast for Emily, she received a call from an unknown number. Upon answering, she found herself listening to Michael's trembling voice. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to call you like this, but I didn't know who else to turn to," Michael said, his voice broken with emotion. "I've hit rock bottom. I lost my job. I have no money. I don't even have a place to live." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a mix of compassion and frustration. "Michael, what do you expect me to do?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I guess I just needed to talk to someone who knew me before I ruined everything." After a long pause, Sarah spoke softly. "Michael, I can't fix this for you, but if you really want to change things, I can help you find professional help." Michael accepted. Grateful, Sarah hung up the phone feeling emotionally drained, but also with a strange sense of closure. For the first time, she felt that she could truly let go of the past and look to the future. That afternoon, Sarah met with David to tell him about Michael's call. To her surprise, David showed no jealousy or annoyance. "You're an incredible person, Sarah," David said, taking her hand. "Your compassion, even after everything you've been through, is admirable." Sarah felt her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for understanding." "Always," David replied, leaning in to give her a soft kiss on the forehead. The following weeks brought new challenges and joys. Sarah helped Michael find a therapist and a rehabilitation program. Although their relationship remained tense, they slowly began to build a new dynamic as Emily's co-parents. Meanwhile, her relationship with David continued to flourish. Sarah found herself laughing more, dreaming more, allowing herself to be happy again. One night after a romantic dinner at David's house, he asked her a question that would change the course of their lives. "Sarah," David began, visibly nervous, "I know it might seem rushed, but life has taught me not to waste time when you find something special." He paused, taking Sarah's hands in his will. "You marry me?" Sarah felt as if the world had stopped for a moment. She looked into David's eyes, seeing in them all the love and security she had longed for so long. She thought of Emily, of how David had accepted and loved her from the beginning. She thought of herself, of how much she had grown and healed. With tears in her eyes and a smile on her lips, Sarah gave her answer. "Yes, David. Yes, I'll marry you." The kiss that followed was full of promises of a bright future, renewed love and second chances. What Sarah didn't know was that this moment of happiness was just the beginning of a series of events that would test their relationship, their family, and everything she thought she knew about love and loyalty. Fate had more surprises in store, some sweet and others bitter, that would change the course of their lives forever. The news of Sarah and David's engagement spread. Quickly, Emily, to Sarah's relief, received the news with enthusiasm, excited at the prospect of having David as her official stepfather. Sarah's friends and family congratulated her, happy to see her happy again. However, not everyone received the news with the same enthusiasm. When Michael found out, his reaction was a mix of shock and resentment. Although he had been making progress in his therapy and rehabilitation, the news of Sarah's engagement to the man who had been his boss seemed to have destabilized him. One afternoon, as Sarah was waiting for Michael to bring Emily back after their weekend together, she received an alarming call from her daughter. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice trembling, "Dad is acting weird. He's yelling and breaking things. I'm scared." Sarah's heart raced. "Where are you now, sweetie?" "In the bathroom. I locked myself in here." "Good. Thinking, my love, stay there. I'm coming right now." Sarah immediately called the police and David, who insisted on accompanying her. When they arrived at Michael's apartment, they found a chaotic scene. Michael was in the middle of the living room, surrounded by overturned furniture and broken glass, shouting incoherently. "You!" Michael shouted when he saw David. "You took everything from me!" David stepped forward, shielding Sarah with his body. "Michael, calm down. We're here for Emily. She's scared." The mention of his daughter seemed to pierce through Michael's fog of anger. His face crumbled and he fell to his knees, sobbing, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." As the police took Michael away to receive psychiatric care, Sarah hugged Emily, who had emerged trembling from the bathroom. David surrounded them both with his arms, forming a protective shield. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Michael was admitted to a mental health center, and Sarah had to explain to Emily, in the gentlest way possible, that her father needed special help and that they wouldn't be able to see him for a while. One night, while Emily was asleep, Sarah broke down in David's arms. "What if it never ends?" she sobbed. "What if we're always dealing with Michael's crises?" David hugged her tightly. "We're in this together, Sarah. Whatever happens, we'll face it as a family." As the weeks passed, life began to find a new rhythm. Sarah and David started planning their wedding, deciding it would be an intimate ceremony with only their closest friends and family. Emily got involved in the preparations with enthusiasm, excited about being able to wear a bridesmaid dress. Meanwhile, Sarah received regular updates on Michael's progress at the mental health center. Although slow, he seemed to be making significant advances. His therapist suggested that over time, it might be beneficial for Emily to resume contact with her father in a supervised manner. As the wedding date approached, Sarah found herself dealing with a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was excited to begin this new chapter of her life with David. On the other, she couldn't help feeling a twinge of guilt and concern for Michael one afternoon, as Sarah was trying on her wedding dress in the company of her mother and her best friend Lily. The latter noticed her worried expression. "What's wrong, Sarah?" Lily asked. "You should be radiant, but you seem miles away." Sarah sighed, looking at herself in the mirror. "It's just that what if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm rushing into this?" Sarah's mother approached, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Honey, love doesn't have a schedule. What matters is how David makes you feel, how he treats Emily, and if you can imagine building a life with him." Lily nodded, adding, "Besides, it's not like you don't know David. You've seen what he's like in good times and bad, and he's been there for you and Emily in situations that many men would have found too complicated." The words of her mother and friend helped calm Sarah's doubts. She took a deep breath, looking at herself in the mirror once more. This time she saw a strong woman ready to embrace the happiness she had found. The wedding day arrived, bringing with it a beautiful, clear sky and a soft spring breeze. The ceremony took place in a small garden, decorated with white flowers and soft lights. Emily, radiant in her bridesmaid dress, walked in front of Sarah, scattering rose petals. When Sarah began her walk down the aisle, her eyes met David's. The look of love and admiration on his face dispelled any remaining doubts. This was her moment, her new beginning. Vows were exchanged, promises made, and with a kiss, Sarah and David sealed their union. The applause and cheers from their loved ones filled the air, but for Sarah at that moment, only she, David, and Emily existed, now united as a family. During the reception, as Sarah danced with David, she noticed Emily sitting alone at a table, with a thoughtful expression on her face. Concerned, Sarah excused herself to David and approached her daughter. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, sitting next to Emily. Emily fiddled with the hem of her dress before answering, "Yeah, it's just that I was thinking about Dad. I wonder if he's okay, if he's happy for us." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She hugged her daughter tightly. "Your dad loves us, Emily, and I know he wants us to be happy even if things are different now." David, who had noticed the interaction, approached and knelt in front of Emily. "You know what? I think we should call your dad tomorrow, the three of us together, to tell him about the wedding and make sure he's okay. What do you think?" Emily's eyes lit up. "Really? Can we do that?" Sarah looked at David with gratitude and love. "Of course we can, sweetie." The rest of the night passed in a blur of happiness. Sarah found herself laughing, dancing, and celebrating with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. When she and David finally retired to their bridal suite, she was exhausted but happy. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, hugging her from behind as they looked out the window at the illuminated city. Sarah turned in his arms, looking into his eyes. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. About how, despite all the pain and difficulties, I've found this happiness with you." David kissed her softly. "We're lucky to have each other, and I promise I'll do everything in my power to make you and Emily happy every day." As they fell asleep in each other's arms, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and hope for the future. However, fate had more surprises in store for this new family. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and soon they would find themselves facing challenges that would test the strength of their love and mutual commitment. The months following the wedding were a period of adjustment for Sarah, David, and Emily. The transition to their new life as a family was not without challenges, but together they found ways to overcome them. David strived to be a present and loving stepfather to Emily, helping her with her schoolwork and supporting her extracurricular interests. Sarah, for her part, balanced her work as a teacher with her growing passion for writing, dedicating her evenings to working on the novel she had started months ago. Michael, meanwhile, continued his treatment at the mental health center. Supervised phone calls with Emily had become regular, and although there were still moments of tension, he seemed to be making significant progress. One Sunday afternoon, as the family was enjoying a picnic in the park, David received a call that would change the course of their lives. "What? Are you sure?" David's voice sounded tense as he listened to his interlocutor. "I understand. Yes, of course. I'll be there first thing tomorrow morning." Sarah looked at him with concern when he hung up. "What's wrong?" David took a deep breath before responding. "It was from work. There have been some financial irregularities in the company. They're investigating and want all the executives to be present for a thorough audit." "Irregularities?" Sarah frowned. "Do you think someone has been embezzling funds?" "I don't know," David admitted. "But whatever it is, it seems to be serious." The following days were a whirlwind of activity. David spent long hours at the office, coming home late and exhausted. Sarah did her best to maintain normalcy at home, for Emily, but she couldn't help feeling a growing anxiety. One night, almost 2 weeks after the initial call, David arrived home with a somber expression that Sarah had never seen before. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. Sarah felt her heart racing. "What's going on, David? You're scaring me." David sat heavily on the couch, running a hand over his face. "The investigation has concluded. They've discovered that someone has been diverting funds from the company for years, millions of dollars." "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "Do they know who it was?" David looked at her, his eyes full of pain. "Sarah, all the evidence points to Michael." Sarah felt as if the ground was opening up beneath her feet. "What? No, that can't be. Michael had his faults, but he'd never—" "I know, I can't believe it either," David said, "but the financial records, the transfers, everything bears his signature, and it coincides with the period when he was in charge of special projects." Sarah collapsed onto the couch next to David, her mind spinning. What's going to happen now? "The company is going to press charges," David responded gravely. "Michael will probably be arrested in the next few days." The news fell like a bomb in their lives. Sarah found herself dealing not only with the shock and betrayal, but also with the difficult task of explaining the situation to Emily. "Is Dad a criminal?" Emily asked, her eyes full of tears. When Sarah finally gathered the courage to tell her what was happening, "We don't know for sure, sweetie," Sarah responded, hugging her daughter. "Sometimes things aren't as simple as they seem, but whatever happens, we're here for you." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Michael was arrested and formally charged with fraud and embezzlement. The media seized on the story, and Sarah found herself shielding Emily from sensationalist headlines and whispers at school. David, for his part, faced his own challenges at work. Although he wasn't implicated in the fraud, his closeness to Michael and his current relationship with Sarah put him in an uncomfortable position. Rumors and suspicious looks followed him. Through the company's hallways one night, while Emily was asleep, Sarah found David sitting in the darkness of the living room, his head in his hands. "David," she said softly, sitting next to him. "What's wrong?" He looked up, his eyes full of anguish. "Sarah, I think I'm going to resign." "What?" "But you love your job," Sarah responded, surprised. "I loved it," David corrected, "but now the trust is broken. People look at me as if I'm guilty too, and honestly I can't help but wonder if I should have noticed something, if somehow I failed in my duty." Sarah took his hands in hers. "David, none of this is your fault. Michael made his own decisions." "I know, but still." David paused, taking a deep breath. "I think I need a fresh start. Maybe we all do." Sarah looked at him intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking," David continued. "I have some savings, and I've always wanted to start my own business. Maybe this is the time we could start over in a city where nobody knows us, where Emily doesn't have to deal with the whispers and the looks." Sarah felt a mix of fear and excitement at the idea. "Are you serious? Leave everything behind?" David nodded. I know it's a lot to ask your job, your friends, your family. I'll understand if you don't want to, but I think it could be good for all of us." Sarah was silent for a moment. Considering the proposal, she thought about Emily, about how the girl had become more withdrawn since Michael's arrest. She thought about herself, about how her novel had been abandoned amid the chaos, and she thought about David, about his love and his desire to protect their new family. Finally, Sarah looked into David's eyes. "Let's do it," she said with a mix of determination and hope in her voice. "Let's start over." David hugged her tightly, relief evident on his face. "I love you, Sarah, together. We can overcome anything." As they embraced in the quietness of the night, Sarah felt a strange mix of excitement and apprehension. They were about to embark on a new adventure, leaving behind the pain and memories of the past. But what would the future hold for them? Could they really escape the shadows of their past? What Sarah didn't know was that this decision would trigger a series of events that would test their love, loyalty, and determination like never before. The path to their new beginning would be full of unexpected turns and surprising revelations that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. The process of moving was a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and David decided to relocate to a coastal town several hundred miles away, a place where they could start from scratch. Emily, although initially reluctant to leave her friends behind, perked up when she learned they would be living near the ocean. Sarah resigned from her teaching job, promising herself to dedicate more time to her writing in her new life. David, for his part, began making plans to open a small business consulting firm. Moving day arrived faster than they had expected. As they loaded the last boxes into the moving truck, Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of nostalgia as she looked at what had been her home for so many years. "Are you ready?" David asked, putting an arm around her shoulders. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, it's time to look forward." The journey to their new home was long, but filled with anticipation. Emily spent much of the time imagining what her new school would be like and making plans to explore the beach. Sarah and David exchanged knowing looks, excited about the new chapter they were about to begin. Their new house was a charming property near the beach, with a small garden and a terrace overlooking the sea. As they unpacked and settled in, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The salt air and sea breeze seemed to cleanse not only the air but also her worries. The first few days in their new home were a whirlwind of activities. Enrolling Emily in her new school, exploring the neighborhood and starting to establish their new routines. David immersed himself in planning his consultancy, while Sarah finally found the time and inspiration to return to her novel one afternoon. As Sarah was writing on the terrace, enjoying the view of the sea, Emily came running home from school, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, Mom!" she exclaimed. "I made a new friend today. Her name is Olivia and she lives right across the street. Can I go play at her house tomorrow?" Sarah smiled, happy to see her daughter adapting so well. "Of course, sweetie, I'm so glad for you." That night, as they had dinner as a family, David shared some exciting news. "I found a perfect location for the consultancy," he said, his face lit up with enthusiasm. "It's downtown, near the financial district. I think I'll be able to open it in a couple of months." Sarah squeezed his hand, sharing his excitement. "That's wonderful, David. I'm so proud of you." However, as the weeks passed, Sarah couldn't help but notice that something seemed to be bothering David. Sometimes she would catch him staring into space with a worried expression, or talking quietly on the phone, abruptly ending the conversation when she entered the room. One night after putting Emily to bed, Sarah decided to confront the issue. "David," she said softly, sitting next to him on the couch, "is there something worrying you? You know you can tell me anything." David sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. I've been trying to find the right time, but I guess there's no good time for this kind of news." Sarah's heart raced. "What's going on?" "I received a call from my former colleague at Galaxy Corporation," David began. "Apparently, the fraud investigation has taken an unexpected turn. They've found new evidence suggesting that Michael might have been framed." Sarah felt as if the ground was opening up beneath her feet. "What? But how is that possible? Apparently, someone else in the company was using Michael's digital identity to make the fraudulent transfers, David explained. Investigators believe Michael may have been a scapegoat. Sarah jumped to her feet, her mind reeling. But that means, oh my God, Michael has been in jail all this time being innocent. We have to do something. We have to help him. David looked at her with a mixture of guilt and concern. Sarah, there's more. The person they're now investigating as a possible culprit is my former mentor, the man who promoted me to my position. Sarah collapsed back onto the couch, stunned by the revelation. David, why didn't you tell me this before? I was afraid, David admitted. Afraid that you'd think I was somehow involved, afraid of ruining this new life we're building, but I can't keep hiding it from you. We need to decide what to do. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling that the world they had carefully built over the past few months was beginning to crumble. We have to go back, she said finally. We have to help Michael. Clear his name. David nodded slowly. I know, but Sarah, you have to understand that if we go back, if we get involved in this, it could affect everything. My reputation, our financial security, the stability we've created for Emily. I understand, Sarah said, taking David's hands in hers. But we can't live with this on our conscience. Michael may have made mistakes in the past, but he doesn't deserve to pay for a crime he didn't commit. That night, as they lay in bed, unable to sleep, Sarah and David discussed their options. They knew that going back would mean facing not only legal challenges, but also the ghosts of their past. How would Michael react, knowing they had moved on with their lives while he suffered unjustly? How would this affect Emily, who finally seemed to be happy and adjusted in her new life? The next morning, with dark circles under their eyes but determination in their gaze, Sarah and David explained the situation to Emily. Sweetie, Sarah began, there's something important that Dad and I need to tell you. We have to go back to our old city for a while. Your father, your biological father, Michael, needs our help. Emily's eyes widened. We're going to see Dad, but what about my new school? And Olivia? David knelt in front of Emily, taking her small hands in his. We know it's difficult, sweetie, but sometimes in life, we have to do the right thing. Even if it's hard, your dad Michael needs us now, and we're going to be there for him. Emily nodded slowly, processing the information. Will we come back here afterwards? Sarah and David exchanged a look. We don't know for sure, my love, Sarah responded honestly, but whatever happens, we'll be together as a family. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah and David had to make hasty arrangements, putting the consultancy plans on hold, organizing the rental of their house, and preparing everything for their temporary return to the city they had left behind. As they packed, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mixture of anxiety and determination. They were about to dive back into the past they had tried to leave behind. Could they help Michael without losing everything they had built? And what secrets and revelations awaited them upon their return? What Sarah didn't know was that their decision to go back would trigger a series of events that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about the past, present, and future. The path to truth and justice would be filled with unexpected turns, surprising alliances, and revelations that would test their love, loyalty, and determination like never before. The return to their old city felt like entering a familiar yet unsettling dream. The streets, buildings, even the smells evoked memories that Sarah had tried to bury. Emily, sitting in the back seat of the car, looked out the window with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Their first stop was at the law firm handling Michael's case. The lawyer, a middle-aged man named Thomas Bennett, greeted them with a grave expression. I'm glad you've come, Thomas said, inviting them to sit in his office. The situation is complicated, but with your help, I believe we can prove Michael's innocence. Over the next few hours, Sarah and David immersed themselves in a tangle of financial documents, email records, and witness statements. Sarah's head was spinning with all the information, but one thing became clear. Michael had been the victim of an elaborate plan to frame him. The real culprit, Thomas explained, appears to be Robert Anderson, David's former mentor. We found evidence that he's been diverting funds for years, using the credentials of various employees to cover his tracks. David slumped in his chair, stunned by the revelation. "I can't believe it, Robert was like a father to me at the company. How could he do something like this?" Sarah took David's hand, offering silent support. "What do you need us to do?" she asked, turning to Thomas. "We need both of you to testify," the lawyer replied. "Your inside knowledge of the company and its procedures will be crucial in demonstrating how Robert could have manipulated the system." The following days were a whirlwind of statements, meetings with prosecutors and preparations for the trial. Sarah and David barely had time to process everything that was happening, focused on their mission to free Michael. Finally, the day came when they could visit Michael in prison. Sarah's heart was pounding as they waited in the visiting room. When Michael entered, Sarah could barely recognize him. He was thinner, with graying hair and a tired expression on his face. But his eyes lit up when he saw Emily. "My little girl," Michael said, his voice breaking with emotion as he hugged his daughter. Sarah and David observed the reunion with a mixture of joy and guilt. When Michael finally looked up at them, there was a moment of awkward tension. "Thank you for coming," Michael finally said. "Thomas told me what you're doing for me. I don't know how to thank you." "It's the right thing to do," David replied. "Michael, I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening earlier." Michael shook his head. "It's not your fault Robert fooled us all." As they talked, the initial tension began. To dissipate, Michael told them about his time in prison, how he had used that time to reflect on his life and past mistakes. Sarah and David, in turn, told him about their new life on the coast and how Emily had flourished there. "I'm happy for you," Michael said with a sad smile. "Really, Emily deserves all the happiness in the world." When it was time to leave, Michael hugged Emily one more time. "I love you. My girl, never forget." That Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Despite everything that had happened, in that moment she could see the man she had fallen in love with so many years ago. The days leading up to the trial were an emotional roller coaster. Sarah and David worked tirelessly with Thomas, preparing their testimonies and reviewing evidence. Emily stayed with Sarah's parents, who had once again become a pillar of support in their lives. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was packed. With journalists crowded at the back of the room, Sarah saw Robert Anderson enter, escorted by guards, his face a mask of arrogance that failed to completely hide his nervousness. As the trial unfolded, the truth began to come to light. The testimonies of Sarah and David, combined with forensic and financial evidence, painted a clear picture of the manipulation and fraud committed by Robert. The crucial moment came when David was on the stand. Robert's defense attorney tried to insinuate that David might have been involved in the fraud. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer said in an accusatory tone, "isn't it true that you directly benefited from the promotion you received after Mr. Anderson framed Mr. Johnson?" David straightened in his seat, his voice firm when he responded, "Yes, I received a promotion, but if you're insinuating that I had anything to do with this fraud, you're very wrong. The moment I suspected something wasn't right, I resigned from my position and have dedicated every moment since then to uncovering the truth and helping Michael." His testimony was powerful and convincing. Sarah, sitting in the audience, felt a surge of pride and love for the man she had chosen as her life partner. After days of testimony and arguments, the moment for the verdict arrived. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the decision. In the case of the state versus Robert Anderson, this court finds the defendant guilty on all charges. Furthermore, the immediate release of Michael Johnson is ordered, and all charges against him are dropped. The courtroom erupted in a clamor of voices. Sarah and David hugged each other, tears of relief streaming down their faces. Michael, sitting on the other side of the room, looked stunned, as if he couldn't believe the nightmare was finally over. In the days that followed, Michael was released and the media was filled with stories about the scandal and exoneration. Sarah, David, and Emily found themselves at the center of a media storm, but they stuck together, protecting their privacy as best they could. A week after the conclusion of the trial, Sarah and David invited Michael to dinner at Sarah's parents' house. The atmosphere was tense at first, But as the evening progressed, they began to relax after dinner. While Emily played in the garden with her grandparents, Michael asked to speak privately with Sarah and David. "I want to thank you again for everything you've done," Michael began. "I know I haven't been the best husband or the best father, and I certainly haven't been a good friend. But what you did for me, I can never repay you." Sarah and David exchanged a look before Sarah spoke. "Michael, we did it because it was the right thing to do. Despite everything that's happened, you're still Emily's father and an important part of our lives." Michael nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I know, and that means a lot to me. But I also know that I can't keep interfering in the life you've built together." He paused, as if gathering courage. "I've decided to move. An old friend has offered me a job abroad, and I think it's the perfect opportunity for a fresh start." David leaned forward, surprised. "Are you sure? What about Emily?" "Emily will always be my daughter, and I'll love her no matter where I am," Michael replied. "But she has a stable family here with you. I don't want to complicate things. I'll come to visit, of course, and we'll be in constant contact. But I think this is best for everyone." Sarah felt a mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and a strange sense of closure. "If that's what you really want, Michael, we'll respect it. But I want you to know that you'll always be welcome in our lives." The three shared a moment of silent understanding, recognizing that this was the true end of one chapter in their lives and the beginning of another. In the weeks that followed, things began to settle into a new normal. Michael said goodbye to Emily in an emotional meeting, promising to call regularly and visit her during holidays. Sarah and David, meanwhile, had to make decisions about their future. "What do you think?" David asked one night as they sat on the porch of Sarah's parents' house. "Should we go back to the coast or stay here?" Sarah looked out at the garden where Emily was playing with a new puppy they had recently adopted. "You know, when we came here, I thought I'd be anxious to get back to our new life. But now I don't know. I feel like we've healed a lot of wounds here. Maybe this is where we're meant to be." David smiled, taking her hand. "I agree. Plus, your family is here, and I've been thinking maybe I could open my consultancy here instead of on the coast. There's a lot of potential in this city." Sarah looked at him, a smile forming on her lips. "Are you sure? I know how excited you were about the idea of living by the sea." "Sarah," David said, his voice full of emotion, "my home is wherever you and Emily are. The sea can wait. We can go there on vacation." They kissed softly, sealing their decision. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. David opened his consultancy, which quickly gained a reputation for integrity and expertise. Sarah, inspired by recent events, finished her novel, a story of redemption and second chances that quickly caught the attention of a publisher. Emily flourished in her familiar surroundings, balancing time between her grandparents, her school friends, and regular calls with Michael. The relationship between Sarah, David, and Michael, though complicated, became one of mutual respect and cooperation for Emily's sake. One Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the trial, the family was gathered in the garden for a barbecue. Sarah's parents were chatting animatedly with David about his plans to expand the consultancy, while Emily played with her puppy, now much larger. Sarah observed the scene with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced in years. Her life had taken so many unexpected turns, had faced so many challenges, but here she was, surrounded by love and happiness. David approached her, putting an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Sarah smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "I was thinking about how lucky I am, about how, despite everything we've been through, we've found our way to happiness." "We are lucky," David agreed. "And, you know, I think the best is yet to come." At that moment, Emily ran up to them, her face lit up with a smile. "Mom, Dad, can we have a picnic at the beach next weekend? Please." Sarah and David looked at each other, smiling. "Of course we can, sweetie," Sarah replied. "That's a wonderful idea." As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in a golden light, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced betrayals, lies, and losses, but they had also discovered the strength of true love, the importance of family and the power of redemption. Their story hadn't been easy, but every turn and every challenge had led them to this moment. As she looked around at the family they had built and the life they had created together, Sarah knew she wouldn't change a thing. The future was bright, full of possibilities, and they were ready to face it together, as the family they had become. In the months that followed, Sarah's novel was published to critical acclaim. Her story of resilience, forgiveness, and second chances resonated with readers across the country. She found herself doing book signings and giving interviews. Sharing her journey from teacher to author, David's consultancy continued to thrive. He had developed a reputation for ethical business practices and innovative solutions, attracting clients from all over the state. Emily, now in middle school, was excelling in her studies and had discovered a passion for environmental science. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, David turned to Sarah with a twinkle in his eye. "You know, I've been thinking," he began. "With the success of your book and the consultancy doing well, maybe it's time we took that family vacation we've been talking about." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Really? Where were you thinking?" "Well," David said, pulling out a brochure from his pocket, "how about a month-long trip to Europe? We could visit Paris, Rome, Barcelona, give Emily a chance to see the world." Emily, who had been quietly reading nearby, perked up at this. "Europe? Are you serious? Can we go to the Eiffel Tower and see the Colosseum?" Sarah laughed, her heart full of joy. "I think that sounds perfect. A new adventure for our family." As they began to plan their trip, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Just a few years ago, she had been in a crumbling marriage, feeling lost and alone. Now, she had a loving husband, a thriving career, and a daughter who was growing into an amazing young woman. The trip to Europe was everything they had hoped for and more. They strolled along the Seine in Paris, explored the ancient ruins of Rome, and basked in the sun on the beaches of Barcelona. Emily's eyes were wide with wonder at every new sight and experience. Sarah found inspiration for her next novel in the winding streets of old European cities, while David made connections with international business owners, expanding his consultancy's reach. On their last night in Paris, as they stood atop the Eiffel Tower looking out over the city of lights, David wrapped his arm around Sarah. "Thank you," he said softly. Sarah looked at him, puzzled. "For what?" "For taking a chance on us," David replied. "For being strong enough to leave a bad situation. For being open to love again. For being an amazing mother to Emily. For everything." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. She leaned in and kissed David softly. "Thank you for being the man I always dreamed of," she whispered. Emily joined them, and the three of them stood there, arms around each other, taking in the beautiful view and the precious moment. When they returned home, life seemed to take on a new vibrancy. Sarah threw herself into writing her second novel, inspired by their European adventures. David's consultancy expanded, opening a new office in a neighboring state. Emily, influenced by their travels, started a cultural exchange club at her school. As the years passed, their family continued to grow and evolve. Emily graduated high school with honors and was accepted to a prestigious university to study environmental science. Sarah published several more successful novels, becoming a respected voice in contemporary literature. David's business became known nationwide for its innovative approaches to sustainable business practices. Michael remained a part of their lives, visiting during holidays and maintaining a loving relationship with Emily. He had found peace in his new life abroad, and there was a newfound ease in his interactions with Sarah and David. On the eve of Emily's departure for college, the family gathered for a special dinner. As they sat around the table sharing memories and laughter, Sarah looked at the faces of her loved ones and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, raising her glass, "to family, not just the one we're born into, but the one we choose and build to love that overcomes obstacles, to second chances, and to the beautiful life we've created together." As they clinked glasses, Sarah caught David's eye and saw in it the same love and admiration, that had been there since the day they met Emily, now a young woman, beamed at her parents with pride and affection. That night, as Sarah lay in bed next to David, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. There had been pain and struggle, yes, but also joy, growth, and an enduring love that had seen them through it all. She thought about the young woman she had been trapped in an unhappy marriage, afraid to dream of a better life. She wished she could go back and tell that version of herself that everything would be okay, better than okay, in fact, that she would find true love, fulfilling work, and a family bond stronger than she could have imagined as. She drifted off to sleep. Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and contentment. Their story hadn't been a fairy tale. It had been real, with all the complexity and challenges that real life brings. But it had also been beautiful, rich with love, growth, and the joy of overcoming obstacles together. Tomorrow they would help Emily move into her college dorm, beginning a new chapter in all their lives. But whatever the future held, Sarah knew they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, with love, courage, and an unwavering belief in the power of second chances.